that's the one thing I would say to people who are building community is like, I almost think in some ways that victimhood is easier to heal than entitlement. Privilege is a constraint, right? And so people who are privileged don't even see how they're constrained from seeing the world in other ways of knowing and other ways of being. And so entitlement's really hard to work with. And in the West, we're bred on a diet of entitlement. And so to deprogram that and to deschool ourselves of that sense of entitlement, one of our internal mantras is a Sufi proverb that's often attributed to the mother. And it says, you are entrusted with everything and entitled to nothing.
In today's episode, I have the pleasure of meeting with not one, but two quality individuals. Ali Khan and Alnoor Ladha are brothers and two of the co-founders of the eco-retreat center and intentional community known as Brave Earth. We get deep into ideas like designing a community model that can support members to live there year-round, and the differentiation between communal and business responsibilities among members. You also get to hear about their community solidarity network called Fuerza del Amor and what they're doing to integrate their local neighbors into the profit pool. Before we jump back into this episode, though, I'd like to give a shout out to a special listener named Trisha. Trisha has been so kind as to contribute to the Buy Jason a Coffee Fund. Yay, Trisha! Trisha writes that she's been finding our guests' insights useful and that I have an evocative interviewing style. Well, Trisha, I hope that I delivered on this one. Thank you so much, and I'd love to hear what this conversation evokes for you. If you too would like to support the show, you may do so by visiting the link in the show notes or the banner on our website, or simply go to ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/sharing insights. Another way you can now support the show while also making your life better is to go to the new resources page on the website. There, I'm showcasing a number of items that I've found useful in my sustainability journey. Many of the items in the resources page are free. Some of them have affiliate links. If you find something that you think would make your life better and choose to make a purchase with the vendor, I get a little help paying my editors. It's a pretty sweet win-win-win situation. If you find some of the free resources useful, everybody's still winning, so go check it out. Well, there are my shameless plugs inviting in financial sustainability for the show, and without further delay, the interview. I'm here today with Ali Khan and Alnoor Ladha of Brave Earth, or Tierra Valiente. This is a regenerative farm and healing arts center that was founded in 2017, which has become an emerging intentional community. Here at Brave Earth, they offer permaculture design courses, natural building workshops, different types of educational experiences, all the way down to plant walks. Two of the founders of Brave Earth are here with me, and we're going to explore not only some of the innovations that maybe they've taken in their natural building efforts, which we'll explore further in our YouTube video, but something that's really important to Brave Earth here is the building of community and the cultivation of community, and not only within the farm here, but also in their efforts of outreach to the neighboring communities. So with that, I want to say thank you to both of you for taking some time out to be with us today and sharing your experiences.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
And for making the trip all the way over here.
Yeah, it's been a great tour. I've been really loving this process. So to start off, why don't you guys each tell us a little bit about what brought you to want to buy land and invite people in to have the kind of experiences that they're having?
Okay, yeah.
Maybe say your name because I don't think people differentiate.
Yeah, my name is Ali Khan, and it's been an interesting ride. I started off, we're born and raised in Vancouver, and ended up being in the finance world, and was in investment banking, asset management, did my MBA, my CFA, all these designations, and I'm just a little bit lost, I think, and we ended up going to Burning Man and working with plants, and I'll let Alnoor tell his side of the story, but we just, had our minds meld of what we want to create in our realities after being open to different possibilities and things like Burning Man, and, just sort of opened our minds. And, we wanted to grow our own food. We wanted to live with our community members and our family and our friends. We want to start a superfood company and a retreat center. And, we basically made a plan, and it just started formulating. It's like I think our spirits were aligned with this project, and it really has felt like there's been a guiding force that has been inexplicable, that has guided us here, and all the people that have contributed to make this a reality.
Yeah, for me, I come from, well, maybe we start even where Alikan started. Is we come from Vancouver, but our parents are East African of Indian, Arab, Persian descent, and we come from a Sufi tribe. And so I think part of our DNA was always like nomadic, and always had a temporary relationship with place, because they were in exile and persecuted. And so growing up as immigrant children in a foreign place, I think two things happened. One is we had a really strong interest in internationalism and cosmopolitanism and what else is happening in the world. And B, at least for me, this was very strong, like a critical lens on the culture in which we were born into. From a very early age, I remember just understanding how spiritually bankrupt the Western culture was, especially when you're immersed in a rich tradition like Sufism and Ismailism and the traditions we grew up in. And I had a background in political strategy. I used to run a consultancy in London and then in New York. And after Occupy happened in 2011, I went on a journey and started an activist collective with different activists from around the world. And we were doing two things. We had a think tank that was trying to get more progressive and radical ideas into the mainstream. And we had an organizing arm that worked directly with social movements, largely peasant movements, farmer movements, indigenous movements, and largely in the global south. And so as we were traveling around the world for this work, a lot of it was solidarity work and staying on people's sofas and staying in rough areas of Nairobi and Joburg and Bogota and other places. A bunch of us started to say, well, yeah, it's important that we fight the existing system and remove the noose of capitalism from the neck of 99% of humanity. And at the same time, we also need to build the alternatives. So like resistance and renewal. And so as we started traveling around, my partner at the time, Yael, who's one of the co-founders here and lives here with us, we just started visiting different communities. So we visit like Tamera in Portugal and Oroville and Findhorn and Damanhur in Italy and all of these different places, and just started learning from them. And initially our intention was to do this in upstate New York. We were living in New York at the time. And in some ways, Costa Rica was the last place, at least I wanted to be. I was like, there's too many like hippies and new age communities here already. And then this perfect piece of land manifested. And our friend, Tom Newmark, who's our neighbor and is an activist and a farmer, they set up probably one of the first biodynamic farms in Central America here on this land. He helped us get this land and sort of gave us the proposition, and Alikan and I just kind of knew like that was it, and so there actually wasn't a lot of thinking and a lot of planning in it. It was much more emergent and being willing, really. And so yeah, and we ended up getting this land in 2016, the end of 2016, and started building in 2017.
Great. So before you even considered buying land, you really went on a tour. You were investigating community essentially.
Yeah.
And these different eco villages that you mentioned are very established. And so what did you find in that tour that you found was uniquely useful to setting you up for success here?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I think the first thing we understood was like the communities that lasted for significantly long periods of time, and there's a lot that don't, the vast majority don't, had very strong social infrastructure, social architecture, social technology. Like I think of Tamera and the forum method and how versed they are in group interaction. And the second is we also saw how lots of communities get gutted from seasonal community members. And so, a place like Oroville, which is like 70% European, who come to live in southern India for a couple months a year, it's very hard to create cohesion in that environment. And we also saw like how the economic engine is so central, because there's a lot of like, you fend for yourself in these communities and you're paying your way to live there. And yet there's no communal way to make money. And so one of the lenses we brought to this is like, how do we use capital to build a post-capitalist infrastructure? Because as a community, we don't want to be in the business of extraction. Like I jokingly always say, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't want to commodify anything. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to own, dominate, acquire. I want to live in gift and in non-hierarchical structures. And so that was one of the first things we decided. Was we actually built the retreat center side first as an economic engine. It's run as a co-op. That profit gets shared among community members, but also goes back into the community. And so that was a critical thing for us, and also non-ownership. So we're stewards of the land. All the partners, all the community members are essentially trustees in a trust rather than private ownership of land. Because as soon as you get into that realm, then you're already in the realm of commodification, and you're already in the realm of hierarchy. And so we wanted to subvert those existing systems. And so we learned a lot about what we could and should do, especially from a community like Tamara, who's been doing this for 40 years and at a pretty significant scale, 200-300 people. And we also learned a lot about what we didn't want to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you want to add to that, Alika.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I think I also did a tour. We kind of did this collective tour, and when we looked at a lot of communities, and there was just not resonance. I don't know. At first we thought we joined some communities, and there was a knowing in us that we needed to start something on our own and take the best aspects of these things and do things differently. And that was in resonance with what we were feeling and seeing. So yeah, I couldn't imagine like joining a community versus starting. So it's interesting how that played out for us, Mm-hmm.
So I hear what you're saying about the seasonal aspect of members being a significant challenge. And I've seen it here, even in efforts that we've had in our region of the South Pacific to have like bioregional councils where landowners in the whole region are coming together talking about what can we do together, as well as seeing many of those individual places. And that whole project really fell apart when the rainy season came and everyone dispersed. That was many years ago. The internet has a lot more tools now to keep people connected as they move around, but still that phenomenon is something I've experienced, and I've seen a number of places get a big push of energy and enthusiasm and membership during the dry seasons. And then, people are lonely and alone in the wet season, the few that are holding it down. So I hear you, that is being a challenge. What do you guys have in your model that helps to minimize that happening here?
Well, I think there's really two things. One is that we're sort of explicit about like for new partners and people coming in, especially on the residential side. Now we finished the retreat side, we're moving into that side, is that we want people here at least 6 months a year. And our ideal is at least 50% of the community is here full time. This is their primary home and residence. But it's hard to get people here 6 months a year. And one of the things we're thinking about is creating our own school. I think one of the sort of dominant critiques we all have of the psychosis of Western culture is the education system itself, which is essentially set up to create essentially for job creation. That's what it's vocational training, and it's a numbing. And so how do we create a school system that we could do an entire school year in 6 months, which then frees up the parents to deschool and unschool their children for the other 6 months? Also having this sort of shared economic engine, because a big part of the reason people leave is essentially that, right? And so if the model that we've been working with, and it's still hypothesis right now, right? Like we're only opening in January. It's called 50-25-25, which is all the profit from whether it's the surplus of a farm, the retreat center, the eco lodge itself, lines of business that might come out of this place, superfood companies, whatever, goes into one shared profit pool, and 50% of that profit comes back to the community. So it's, one share, one vote, direct democracy. We decide together where will those funds go, and that sort of deepens our place here and the reinvestment in the land and all of that. And then 25% will go into profit sharing, like an ESOP, employee share ownership. where there's no distinction between labor and capital. So if somebody works on the land or they're one of the partners who put in funds, they're profit sharing in that. And so there's some surplus and some dividend that gets distributed among people. And then 25% would go into a fund to try to help replicate these types of communities. So rather than more people coming here, which, doesn't really make sense, right? It's not a huge piece of land. It's 88 acres. Half of it is rainforest that you wouldn't touch. Our plan is to cut the minimum amount of trees as possible and really work with the natural contours of the land. And so it's better to help other people set up their own communities, especially if they share our philosophy, which is, we're trying to create post-capitalist infrastructure, as we said earlier, right? Non-hierarchy, non-ownership of land, decommodification, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, those are just some of the things. But and at the same time, you can't really control these things, right? And so it's just a balance of setting some structure in place, but also allowing for emergence.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really well said. The only thing I would add is that we're really blessed to be in this area, this land. We're near La Fortuna, and it's like the best weather. It rains a little bit all year. There's sun all year. It's not kind of like the beach, the weather by the beach, where you're like rained out and it's like super monsoony. It's like, even in our wet season, it's a flux of sun and rain. And so I think that also, along with having the Brave Earth Retreat Center, which we're going to have programming all year, and that being the economic engine for us to plug into, I think that's also helpful is the weather.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. The retreat center side of things is also, I see, as a solution to that question I asked. Like you said, having an income model that everyone can benefit from helps them from having to go back to wherever they come from and work. What is it about? So that brings me to thinking about, okay, you've got this retreat center model. Members are all profit sharing. And what about labor contributions to the business model? Is it a model where everyone who's part of the community has to contribute time and effort to the business model? Or is there an option to pay more and contribute less time, or contribute more time and pay less to come in? Or how do you create a sense of equanimity among members who are contributing to and co-benefiting from your various business models?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the retreat center is run like a retreat center where, there's room and board, and the retreat center makes those funds. And as Alnoor said, it will eventually go into a 50, 25, 25 model. What's a little different about us is that our community members, what we're attracting and what we're bringing in is masters in a sense. So people who are members here are leading things like men's circles. They're leading workshops. And so they're also participating from bringing in groups. And so it's like a shared, it's almost like a shared baby where we're all taking care of it and feeding the engine. So, a lot of our retreats are going to be internally crafted by Brave Earth Productions. And so we're working on that as a team with a lot of the shareholders who are here, and bringing in programming that's super unique and geared to our superpowers, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And and that the way we think about it is there's like seva time, right? So everyone in the community puts in roughly 10 hours of service into the community in some way, and it's not policed in any way. If your contribution is that you're walking around with your mala and praying, or doing body work on people, or whatever it is, it's like a trust-based system that you will energetically contribute to the field and honor the land and give more than you take. But for the people who want income, let's say, beyond the dividend, then we pay them for their labor, right? So they can work in the retreat center, they can work in the eco lodge, they can work in the farm, and we're going to pay those rates anyways. We have a preference to hire local Costa Ricans because, it just makes more sense to do that. And we'd rather have Costa Ricans in the profit pool. in the share pool and in the co-op, and sort of normalize these types of models. But rather than like paying less, it's like everybody contributes the same, and if you have a need, then you let us know and we figure out a way to get you income for that. We also want to create a lot of like micro businesses, right? So we have a volunteer right now who's an amazing bamboo worker, and that's his passion and that's what he wants to do. And so when we finish the build side, we're probably just going to donate our bamboo equipment to him and help him set up a shop here, so he could do that. And so, yeah, that's how we think about it, is more like we're in family, we're in dialogue, we're in relationship, and we just discuss ways to create collective abundance for all of us. And there are people in the community who also run their own businesses on the side, right? They're like, it's mostly a community of healers, activists, and artists. So some of the artists sell their own stuff. Healers would, use the retreat center. A couple of the activists work in different NGOs where they can do distributed organizing work. And so it's kind of to each their own need, essentially. And we do discuss it as a community. Like, what are your needs? Like, what would allow you to live, with sufficiency? And we also think in those terms of like private sufficiency, public luxury. Like when we were building the residential side, we prejudiced the commons, so the common spaces will be really beautiful, but our housing is simple, right? It's not slumming it, but it's not bougie, it's something in between. And what it does is it just keeps the costs low enough for the type of people we want to attract.
Okay. So the members that are part of the project now are all in this agreement that when they're here, they're making weekly contributions to the place. Do you have any kind of formal like community living agreements or member requirements that are written that either short-term or long-term members or visitors have to agree to in being here?
Yeah, we can share the document with you if you want.
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people would appreciate that. Sure.
Happy to. Yeah. We also have what we call like a mystical anarchist etiquette. It's sort of the traditions we come from, right? From a political philosophy. Anarchism is essentially about localization and self-governance and self-determination, but not in an individualist frame. It's not libertarianism. And mysticism is direct relationship to the divine. And so we try to sort of create space for that. And, when we talk about etiquette, it's not in like a European way of manners and social form. It's being responsive to a living planet and being in dialogue with not just the natural world and the more than human world, but also the frequency and the energy in a room, And so etiquette is like pre-law, it's pre-morality, it's precognition. It can't be taught, but it can be practiced in communal environments. And as like Alikan was saying, we're trying to cultivate a community of masters who are attentive to their etiquette, as opposed to you must do this or you must do that, Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you for offering to share those documents.
Yeah,
with
yeah.
us. I'm excited to read
sure.
it. What kind of daily or weekly interactions does the community practice to keep that cohesion going?
We have a weekly forum type session where we do a check-in and we hold space if there's issues or things happening. And it's just a place where we all connect, and then there's like various circles, working circles and groups and our stewardship circle where we also connect. And, we can call counsel whenever we need. So if we're going through interpersonal issues with a partner or with somebody on the land, we call counsel, and 2 or all of our members join. So there's just various touch points that emerge, but the weekly councils is the main one.
And we have this sort of holarchy, synarchy organizing model. So as Alikan says, these different working circles, working groups. And so infrastructure, build, spirit, which is like design and feel, experience, culture, etc. And anyone can join any of those circles. Each circle has a lead, and that lead comes in and lets their decisions be known, or what the internal dynamic is, to a stewardship circle, which is made of 6 people in the community. And so there's that touch point. And there's also just a lot of shared activity. We do like morning practice together often. there's like a women's circle, there's like singing circles, there's, and to be honest, what's I think is like critical in the community as well is medicine work. There has been sort of a shared desire to work with plant medicine individually. It's not like it's a public thing that's offered or whatever, but every person has their own spiritual practice. And we say there's like three main areas of inquiry, which is eros, gnosis, and polis. And eros is not necessarily open love, but it's more like being in full expression around your relationships, and not just relationships in intimate couples, but relationships amongst all of us, relationship to the natural world. And how do we cultivate our erotic relationship with the divine, And so there's a tending to that relational tissue. And then the gnosis is, as we were saying earlier, direct experience to the divine. And there's lots of ways to get there. Like Ali Khan and I come from a Sufi tradition, but there's people who come from Taoist traditions or Buddhist traditions or shamanic traditions. And we share that knowledge amongst each other. So people do their research and their exploration and then come back to the group and share what they're learning in their various practices. And that spiritual exploration also holds us together. And then the polis is rethinking the political economy. This is the land being in stewardship, explorations around biomimicry with architecture, or biophilia with land design, or direct democracy. And, the people who want to geek out on those things also spend time together exploring that. So those are kind of we don't say like, this is what we're necessarily about, but we just say these are three areas of inquiry: polis, eros, and gnosis, and they're kind of held together by bios, which is the natural world, right? The sort of case and casing in which we live, which is Gaia herself.
Do these terms come from the Sufi religion, or
no? They're Greek and Latin, but they're just shorthands and expressions for that. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your community members that are more long-term residentially based, that have made some form of investment into the project. And then you have guests that come for the retreats and so forth. Mm-hmm. Do you have any type of volunteer opportunities that you welcome people in on?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we said we weren't open to volunteers at one point, and we just got a flex of volunteers. So it's really been an organic process of like word of mouth and friends, more so as we're like ramping up for the retreat center, and people are just plugging in the garden and want to do learn how we're building and are doing work exchanges. So there's opportunities. We don't have any formal programs yet. I think once the retreat center is running and we see what our needs are, and the housing where we would house people and all that stuff, we may have a more formal program, especially once the community site's built and there's just more housing available for people to stay in. But yeah, we're definitely open. And I think we've been thinking a lot about like having an exchange program where it's like a residency and kind of, people participate in some of the workshops that we're catering to, whether it be permaculture or plant medicine or men's retreat. And it's almost like an initiation, as we see the world and the state it's in. Like a lot of young people need these rites of passage, and so maybe gearing a program that's like semi-volunteer, semi-initiation, several month long. So there's a lot of things that we're kind of working out, but nothing formal as of yet.
So currently, the people who have found you and been accepted in as volunteers, do you find it harmonious and useful to fit them into these community circles, or you kind of just have that aside? And
No, we integrate them. Yeah, they come to community council, and the community council is open to everyone. The stewardship circle and more of the working groups, they probably don't. Depends on how long they stay. Like we have someone right now who's going to be helping in programming, and so it really just depends on the person. But our aim is to integrate everyone who stays as if they are a family member, right? And not creating like exclusion in any way. I think the hesitation we usually have around volunteers is like we see a lot of communities like exploiting young people essentially, and they come and they work for free for months and months and months. And yes, they are learning something, but we don't want to be in the commodification business in any way. And so that's just a hard thing to balance, right? But if someone's like, hey, I really need this and I want to be here, we just had someone here for like a month who just needed a place to stay, and she's a single mom, and so like you just say yes, right? It's almost just like case by case, because we just want to be open to the emergence of it. But as Elikan says, at some point it would be really important for us to do a proper like organized fellowship of some kind, for sure.
Mm.
So moving outside of Brave Earth's, I guess, property lines,
Biosphere.
There's your biosphere. I like that. Well, even within it, I see you have a significant team of neighbors that are helping you build this gorgeous, amazing place. And you talked about, working in share models for those folks as well, so that they're benefiting long term from what they're helping you build here. And there was mention about you having kind of an outreach arm of the project here called Fuerza del Amor. And I understand that is one of your ways of reaching to the outer community, the outer biosphere, maybe. Tell us a little bit more about that. What are your plans for touching the lives in the pueblo around here?
So this kind of came out of the COVID moment. We've always had plans to create bioregional self-sufficiency and sovereignty. And when the COVID moment happened, it just gave us the opportunity to do that, because we weren't distracted with retreats and gatherings and all of that. And Alnoor Ladha, who's one of our community members, is sort of spearheading this work. And it's essentially a mutual aid network model. And that's actually related to the last question as well, of how we gather. And so the model is that this is the average pueblo size in Costa Rica. It's like 60 or 70% of Costa Rica is about 200, 300 people person communities. And so there's about 110 houses or something in this area. So if we had 40 people join this volunteer network, that's 10 people every Sunday. It was once a month volunteering from the community. And what we offer is the organizing support. We have 3-person organizing team, Alnoor and 2 others. And we pay about $500 in hardware per house. And we do these Solidarity Sundays where we go to each person's house in the community. Eventually we'll get, hopefully, inshallah, we get to them all. And it's like a mutual aid construction, essentially. So the organizing happens beforehand. People come on Sundays and we can help do the basics, build walls, put in toilets, what's needed, put in a primary garden. So Sarah Hartley, who's our permaculture lead and chief farmer, she organizes a bunch of us to do that. And then whoever's on the land from Brave Earth comes and supports as well. So there might be 5 or 10 of us and 10 local people and 3 organizers. And that would be like the ideal Sunday. And from that sort of mutual aid construction, if you will, a kind of whole model has spun out of it, where there's a community hub called Mycelio. There's going to be a community food forest. We just got 8 acres of land that's essentially been gifted for us to create a secondary garden, essentially. So if your house has your primary stuff, this would have more like sweet potato and yucca and higher touch crops, essentially. And that would be like an open food forest for the community. And from that, there's also community policing arm and like co-counsel for people. So there's mediation, so we don't need external police officers who are often, not in tune with the community itself, coming from the external world. So a whole kind of little community ecosystem services, let's say, is emerging from Fuerza del Amor.
So how are you organizing this centralized from your hub here, or are you organizing this from the Pueblos Desarrollo? Or
it's 2 local community members and Alnoor from our community. So it's a mix between us and our neighbors, essentially. It's the broader community coming together to do this.
And we because we are building the retreat side, we had a lot of the tools and the construction equipment. So on Sundays we allow that equipment to be used. So they're using the tools and things to make doors and toilets and stuff. But then they'll work at site and they'll work here on the Sundays. And then the house has been rented where it's the hub, as Alnoor called it, the mycelio, which will be like the networking place, which they're working on now actually to get it running to be like a community center, a coffee shop, place for connection, Yeah.
And about outside your gates here, about how far is kind of the center of the town here, the pueblo?
Like it's sort of it's like it's like 5 minutes maybe. It's a pretty small community.
It's got a high school and a little. It's like a normal.
It's like your average town. Yeah.
And so the community gardens and fruit forests and this community center, are they kind of in the middle of your space here? Is that kind of at the gates, or
no,
you have
it's
another
outside.
property outside of it?
It's outside. Yeah. It's like it's right in the middle of the community. So basically, when you enter off the main road, San Isidro Peñas Blancas starts. It's actually called San Juan, our little pueblo. So when you come out of San Isidro Peñas Blancas, you're in San Juan, and that's the pueblo of about 300 people. And so it's right in the middle of that. So it's sort of, we're at the end of the pueblo, like sort of, we're almost on the edge of the eternal rainforest here, and so it's right in the middle of town.
And that's where the mycelio is as well. There's a house being rented that's right there in the
house
center.
and the farm are right beside each other.
Okay, and these are something that you bought, or they're being donated to the cause?
They just gave it to us for really low monthly rent. The owners know what we're doing for the community and part of the community, and so they've said, take these long leases for super reasonable rent. And like in a place like Costa Rica, for a few $100s a month, you can get a perfect little center in the middle of town. And we're also using regenerative agriculture and organic methods. And so if they've been growing yucca, for example, in conventional destructive agrochemical processes, right? And so they get to regenerate their land, and it's not being used anyways right now. And so the community benefits from it. So landowners in the community who have multiple pieces of land are really open to that. And we think, let's see, we're in the first year, it's super early days, it's an experiment, but there's a possibility for this to be a very replicable model. And almost like we feel as international people coming into, another country, that this is not just like a nice to have, it's critical that we're integrated into the community and we're of service to the community that we're embedded in, firstly. Secondly, that we believe in localization. We believe in anarchist philosophy, we call it subsidiarity, which is like the base of power has to be where decisions are made, which is the local level. And so, we feel like this is a sort of critical missing piece in the infrastructure of communities, which is creating that bioregional self-sufficiency. Right. And look, when collapse happens, and it will happen, we probably have 10 years left at best of the Western way of living. You can't, if we just look at the economic system as it is, it requires 3% growth per year, right? That's the minimum the World Bank and the IMF and others say is necessary, right? And in this growth-based industrial capitalist system, that means you're doubling the global economy every 20 years. Like 3% a year doesn't sound like a lot, but just think about that. In 20 years, double the amount of Big Macs, iPhones, Toyota Priuses, et cetera, right? It's physically impossible. And with debt-based currency, you have to grow the pie in order for the Ponzi scheme to not implode on itself. And so part of the thinking is like the people who are going to sort of be the most resilient in the face of those types of global machinations are people and communities that have a strong web of interpersonal relationship and food sovereignty, and ideally indigenous wisdom of place. Those are sort of the three factors that we want to contribute to.
So in setting this all up for the local regional community, have you done any kind of like surveying or kind of deep questioning with the people here that you're wanting to serve to see what they are looking for, what they'd be hoping for out of a program?
Of course.
Like
It's
this?
that's really like the first step. So this idea emerged from and with the community. And then when we realized it, like roughly the scale needed to make this thing work, right? Like you have a 300-person community. If you want 10 volunteers per a Sunday, you're going to need at least 40 people in that pool. And so Alan and Ali and Krishna, the the two local women who work with the land went door to door, and I think they're still in process of doing it.
Yeah.
Every house in the neighborhood, and having a conversation with every single person in the neighborhood. And then also, and I'm sure this is true for most towns, there's like an unofficial local mayor, this amazing woman named Rocio, who runs the local water. She's like the Aya rep locally, and she's like the mama of the neighborhood. You know, she kind of knows everything from who needs what to what the local gossip is, right? And we work really closely with her. And actually, Alex, one of the FDA crew, is her daughter. And so it's deeply embedded in the community. Like, I think that's the only way to do it, right? Like the old model of believing that you're separate, and even the idea of charity is so laughable, right? It's like, we don't believe in charity. You know, there's that old line that says charity only exists because we don't have justice. You know, we come from a solidarity lens. And so that's always happening in dialogue. And we always learn, like, of course, as outsiders, as foreigners, as gringos, like, we don't know what we don't know. And that's part of the humility, is like, we have blind spots and we are constantly making mistakes, but we ask for that feedback of like, how do we show up better as community members?
Wow. Well, you know, you guys have really offered so much. I know that myself, and if myself, then many others are really going to take so much from this to help improve their own models for how they're approaching their projects. I'm really happy to hear that you're taking that time to connect with the neighborhood and get to know their needs and wants and fears before jumping into these projects. It sounds like you guys are really doing so much to get yourselves off to a strong start. And even though you're one of the maybe newer impact centers in the country relatively to some of the other people I've been interviewing that have been here for 25, 30 years, from the looks around, you guys have done a lot of planning, a lot of team building, which is maybe one last little question that I'd like to check in with you about. I did want to approach a little bit about your natural building tactics, which are super impressive. I'm in love with the place. I think we're going to have to keep a lot of that conversation for our YouTube video later. Maybe in the morning, we'll explore some of that in detail. So if anyone listening wants to find out more about that, make sure to check the link in the show notes to the video. But before we go, let's talk a little bit about team building. You said that you guys you've been attracting experts in various fields and really intentionally building your community here through the gifts that people have. Is there anything in your approach to finding these people that has been systematic, or something, or some ideas that other listeners could think about when they want to build a community? They want to get more members involved in their project. They want to build a team. They want to co-create, but they don't really have maybe a strong network right away of people to reach out to, or they've already exhausted their network and they want to find those people to fill niches. Do you have any advice for that?
It's a hard question. The honest answer is I don't really know. You know, it's just been so organic for us. Like Alnoor, as we talked about, is an activist and started the Rules and various other NGOs, and just met like a network of like-minded people. And also through working with the plants, and we've been studying with plant medicine for a while, just being introduced to really like-minded people, and the team dynamic is it's actually been one of our biggest challenges and our biggest opportunities for growth. I know it's like it's gotten my growth edge caught a few times, and because when we first started this, I was the only one who came on the land at first, and so as we built the team and got systems going, and having that background where you could handle lots of complexity, and as the different team members plugged in, we really had to like step back and relook at how our team working systems were working, and looked at these circles that seemed to be working a lot better. And then just having like systems for interpersonal conflict, and being open and open to challenges, and having an open heart, and understanding that we get caught in our stories and things, and just having a lot of compassion for one another, So, there's so many facets of teamwork and team building and attracting the right people that I don't quite know where to go with that. But it's just, I think, really it comes down to the self work in many ways for how our team has co-evolved. It's just like understanding that we're in this animate field and the field is alive, and approaching conflict or meetings is with the lens of how do we serve the field, how do what I'm going to say serve the field versus anything else, and just being open and doing that self work and self practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. No, I think that creates the resonant field. And like most of the projects I see where it's like, an individual, usually especially in Costa Rica, from California, who doesn't have a plan, who just bought a piece of land and then wants to like stay the sole owner. And then all of a sudden they're wondering why there's like so much conflict. And it's because like the imposition immediately off the bat is one of hierarchy and patriarchy, and it's overly structured, right? And what we find is like the deeper we go into our spiritual practice, the more we let go of concepts like ownership, preference, identity, all the things that the mystical traditions would say to you that block our ability to transcend the subject-object duality, the idea of the other. And the more we're in that practice, then that resonant field attracts people who are also in that selfless practice, and that's the most powerful thing. And I feel like the deeper we go into our generosity and, radical hospitality for not just the people that come, but the more than human world, making offerings to this land, being in reverence to this land, praying to the natural world, the land starts to trust us. And when the land trusts us, it almost takes care of who comes here, and who stays. Like there's people who I thought, I could see them being like partners in this project, and the land and the spirits of the land give them such a difficult time that they just don't want to come back. And it's almost like the land naturally filters who comes. And then there's these people who I'm sometimes, on the fence about, will they stay or not? And then they have these massive breakthroughs while they're here. It's such a potent field. I literally, our neighbor calls this the Goldilocks sort of region. It's like, as Alikan was saying, like perfect temperature, 80 degrees all year round. And it's kind of always cool, but always warm. And, it's one of the best farming lands because of the volcanic sediment. We're 30 kilometers from Arenal. And we have the Children's Eternal Rainforest and a very healthy biosphere and biosystem and biome in this whole area. The land has really done a lot of that work, but it's not like the land in isolation. It's the land in relationship to the field of prayer that we create, right? And, if we're being good students of our culture and we know how to diagnose the psychosis of late stage capitalism, which is a practice we're all trying to be in, we see like the two deepest shadows from a thought form perspective are victimhood and entitlement. And so that's also two thought forms we try to work with on ourselves, and finding those aspects of ourselves that are caught in the loop of victimhood or caught in the loop of entitlement. And that's the one thing I would say to people who are building community is like, I almost think in some ways that victimhood is easier to heal than entitlement. Privilege is a constraint, right? And so people who are privileged don't even see how they're constrained from seeing the world in other ways of knowing and other ways of being. And so entitlement's really hard to work with. And in the West, we're bred on a diet of entitlement. And so to deprogram that and to deschool ourselves of that sense of entitlement, one of our internal mantras is a Sufi proverb that's often attributed to the mother. And it says, you are entrusted with everything and entitled to nothing. You are entrusted with everything and entitled to nothing. So you've been given the bounty of life and, the 1,000 generations of ancestors that came before you to be incarnate in this moment. And you've been entrusted with all of that, and you're entitled to absolutely nothing. Because if you know how to manage and be in gratitude for your endowments, you walk in a very different way than if you feel entitled to it. And as soon as we feel a sense of entitlement energy, that's how we know, there's not going to be resonance between us. and it's a very delicate dance to play, because you don't necessarily want to be in judgment, but you want to be in discernment. And it's a practice as well. And it also requires finding it within you, right? The embodiment aspect of that is the most important, actually. The more we clear our field, the more we open the space to find the others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. You've really offered this community a lot to think about and consider in moving forward, and myself included. Primarily, I can speak for myself. So thanks so much for sharing your experiences. I look forward to getting to know both of you better and seeing more of this land and sharing more of the really inspiring things that you're doing here. Thanks so much.
Your pleasure.
Before
Thank you
we
for doing
close,
this project.
Oh, hey, I'm just following my calling, Tell our listeners a little bit about where they can find you online.
Yeah, sure. We have a website, www.braveearth.com. And we have some retreats coming up if people want to tune in. There's a permaculture design course at the end of the year.
What are the dates on that?
It's November, mid-November, I believe. So you can tune into that. And also you can tune into the Patreon site if you want as well. If you want to support.
We're trying to cultivate a membership model. And so it's essentially pre-paying for the stay, but it just allows us to manage cash flow and support our solidarity fund. So when we run retreats, we want to make sure that low-income people, that locals, that activists, and those who are not, who don't necessarily benefit in the same way from the current extraction paradigm, have access to what we're doing here.
Okay, and so what kind of things will listeners find if they go to your Patreon?
The Patreon's on our website, right?
Yeah, it's on our website on Contact Us, I believe. There's like tiers of monthly membership models. So
just check out our site, and okay. it'll all be there. And also as we open up the volunteer program that we're going to be thinking about for next year, we'll let you know, and go from there. And a lot of our passion as well is helping other communities set up. So it's a lot of people who come here are like, oh, we'd love to be one of the partners, and our feeling is like better to have a more distributed model and approach to these things, to have lots of cultural crystals who are trying to build post-capitalist infrastructure now. And so if we can help in that way, we're always happy to do that.
Okay, fantastic. Wow, there's so much more I'd like to unpack with you guys, but I think this is it for this interview, and we'll see where it all goes. Thanks again for your time.
Beautiful. Thank you,
Yeah,
brother.
thank you.
Yup, I liked that one. I'm still not fully sure in what direction this podcast will go as it evolves, or who's going to get the most value out of it. But I've felt compelled to give a voice to some of the mavericks in the world who've begun experimenting with unique solutions to some of our world's ecological woes. Most of the solutions to our ecological and even economic woes include resource sharing on some level, and that points to community. The question continues to arise, though: how do we navigate the benefits as well as the challenges of living more communally with our neighbors, especially in a world where most of us have grown up to fancy ourselves as individuals? This is something that most people would do very well to start exploring right now. Many are finding it imperative to start preparing their inner as well as their outer environments for whatever changes may be coming ahead. Should resources ever become scarce, which is a growing concern for a lot of people in most places of the planet, coming together with others in our neighborhoods to begin conversations around resource and skill sharing is something that will become increasingly important. As a matter of fact, there's a great website called nextdoor.com that serves as a community bulletin board where you can engage locally in those very types of conversations and resource sharing opportunities. It's currently active in the US, Canada, Australia, and several countries in the European Union, and it's well used to connect people on a neighborhood level. If you live in any of those countries, you might do well to check it out. It's nextdoor.com. Your community is already around you. Brave Earth is a great example of Napoleon Hill's principle of a mastermind. When a few or more people begin working together in a state of harmony toward a common purpose, a new mind is born. That group mind, or mastermind as he calls it, has a greater potential for creation and problem solving than the sum of the individual minds do on their own. Big thanks to Ali Khan and Alnoor for sharing some of the methods that they're designing into their systems to take advantage of the diversity within their growing mastermind, and with the permaculture principles and ethics intentionally interwoven into every stage of their process. If you're thinking that Brave Earth is your kind of place and you want an excuse to visit, consider putting their upcoming permaculture design course on your calendar for November. The teacher, Scott Gallant of Porvenir Designs, is one of the leading permaculture teachers in Costa Rica, as well as a community co-founder and hopefully a future guest on the show. I guess what I'm saying is that you won't likely be disappointed. As always, please rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening so more people can find us and benefit from the insights that we're taking the time to share here. Until next time, be well and be kind.